everyone, this presentation teaches you how to survey stands managed under CEDRSS, the Coast Ecosystem Dispersed Retention Stocking Standards. From that name, it's likely clear that the target audience is coastal surveyors only. If you've watched past CEDRSS training videos, this one is still worth checking out. In it, I walk you through how to collect and record the required data using a new, fully automated spreadsheet. I was inspired to create the CEDRSS spreadsheet and update this training presentation because I have just released a newly updated CEDRSS implementation guide. There's lots of really positive changes in this guide. If you have any questions about CEDRSS and want to learn more, I highly recommend checking it out. Both the guide and the new spreadsheet are posted on the Silviculture Survey Reference Documents webpage. Okay, here's the outline for the presentation. I'm going to quickly cover where CEDRSS applies, the format of these standards, and then I'll get into some basics of surveying and complex vertical stands. I'll then walk you through the survey process step by step and show you where to enter the data in the new spreadsheet. I then have a separate video on data compilation, making a stocking status determination, and reporting to results. To start, I need to cover where CEDRSS applies. As a surveyor, it's really important that you can identify these situations and recommend a site plan or FSP amendment if needed. So these dispersed retention stocking standards should apply to partial cuts in the coast region where dispersed mature trees are retained to achieve non-timber values like visuals, recreation, cultural, biodiversity, or wildlife. They are only appropriate when the dispersed retention is planned and intentional. They are not suitable for blocks where the trees were standing waste. These standards also only apply to stands with a regeneration obligation. They're unique because both the overstory and understory contribute to achieving the regeneration obligation. Lastly, they do not apply to commercial thins or other intermediate cuts that fall under FPPR Section 44, given they do not have a regeneration obligation. To date, CEDRSS has been developed for two stand types, second growth fir and old growth cedar hemlock. The standards have been developed for cedar hemlock old growth stands where the cedar site index is 18 to 30 meters. If you look at Appendix 2 of the implementation guide, we only provide recommended stocking standards for the subzones and site series that meet the site index requirement. For the fir standards, it's calibrated for second growth fir stands where the retained trees are fir, and the fir site index is 24 to 36 meters. For the purpose of CEDRSS, second growth stands are less than 141 years old. Now, if you need to use a retention silvicultural system with high levels of dispersed retention to meet a specific objective, and you don't meet these stand or site definitions, reach out. Additional modeling work will likely be needed to develop new standards, and my branch can help. Okay, next I'll go over the format of CEDRSS. The standard shown on this slide applies to stands that were previously old growth cedar hemlock in the CWH VM101. So right away, you'll notice that it includes residual layer 1 crop basal area across the top, broken into 6 basal area groupings. Then, in the lower row, you have target and minimum stocking standards for well-spaced or free-growing tree tallies for the understory layers, layers 2, 3, and 4. And there's a different target and minimum for each of these basal area groupings. That's because this approach accounts for the joint influence of overstory basal area and understory density in assessing regeneration adequacy. So, how does it work? Basically, you have to determine your crop basal area at each plot. The plot's basal area then sets the regeneration requirements. So if plot 1 has 34 meters square per hectare, it would need to have at least 250 well-spaced stems per hectare in the understory. Then in plot 2, if you have 13 meters square per hectare, then you would need to have at least 400 well-spaced stems per hectare in the understory. And this makes sense. There's way more resources like growing space, light, water, and nutrients in plot 2 to support a higher understory stocking level than in plot 1. You also need to assess compliance across the entire stratum. To do that, You have to determine the stratum's average crop basal area using CAT values. That average then sets the stratum's MSS, which needs to be met overall. I also want to cover how species suitability works for CEDRSS. In the stocking standard tables in the implementation guide, all included species are termed ecologically suitable. They don't split between preferred and acceptable categories. However, some of the ecologically suitable species have restrictions which relate to basal area levels or aspect. Douglas fir, white pine, and coastal lodgepole pine have restrictions for the 2G fir standards and the OG cedar hemlock standards. Cedar has restrictions as well, but only under the 2G fir standards. So I'll start off by covering those. Where Douglas fir, white pine, or lodgepole pine are listed in the stocking standard, they can be treated like an unrestricted preferred species at plots or in areas with less than 11 meters square per hectare total basal area. So again, this is based on total basal area, not crop. However, from 11 to 16.99 meters square per hectare, you can only take up to 200 well space or free growing stems per hectare of these species, and that's by each species. So you could take 200 stems per hectare fir, 200 stems per hectare pine. Then at or above 17 meters squared, you can't take fir or pine as well space or free growing trees. Similarly, at any basal area level, if you're on a north aspect and within one tree length of a residual layer 1 tree, you can't take fir or pine as well space or free growing. This is all based on these species' shade tolerance levels. When you have higher amounts of shade from residuals or you're on a north aspect, they don't grow as well. It can affect their survival and competitiveness, especially when you have high amounts of hemlock natural infill, which is very common on these sites, given its reproductive capacity, far seed dissemination distance, and its shade tolerance. If you ever get the chance to visit Roberts Creek research sites. Now, there are some situations where a different threshold might be appropriate. This can be addressed through the use of approved variations. These are listed in the body of the Forest Stewardship Plan, not in the stocking standards tables, which is one of the reasons that you should always have a copy of the relevant FSP when surveying. Now, if the applicable FSP has an approved variation and the situations and circumstances are met, then you can apply it as long as you submit an approved variation and results. This is very easy to do, and it doesn't require any district approval because it's already been pre-approved as part of the FSP approval, hence its name. Now, in the CEDRSS implementation guide, we suggested several FSP variations. I'd highly recommend amending them into your FSP. There's one for shade intolerant species, and I have it shown on the slide. It allows for up to 400 stems per hectare, well space or free growing, of fir, pine, and lodgepole in areas with 11 to 16.99 total basal area if the plot has a south, southwest, or west-facing aspect with a slope greater than 30%, and it's located in the CDF or CWHXM, MM, DM, DS, or MS subzones. Now, this variation is plot specific. It would only apply at the specific plots that meet these conditions. It doesn't automatically apply to your whole stratum. Okay, here's our second recommended approved variation. This one allows up to 400 well-spaced free-growing stems per hectare of cedar in areas with 17 to 23.99 total basal area and up to 200 stems per hectare of cedar in areas with greater than 24 meters square per hectare if one of three conditions are met. So the conditions are, number one, if the site index of cedar is greater than that of hemlock and there's less than 3,000 total stems per hectare of understory hemlock. The second condition, if the cedar seed lot is greater than 20% genetic worth and there's less than 3,000 stems per hectare total of understory hemlock. Or three, if the silvicultural plan indicates that the SU is planned for an extended rotation to meet the applicable non-timber objective, and an extended rotation in this context would be greater than 100 years. So if any of those three conditions are met, then the variation can apply. So the intent of this variation, we want to allow more cedar in situations where the hemlock is less competitive and the cedar has a better chance of developing into a dominant or co-dominant position long term, or where there's an acknowledgement, a recognition that a longer rotation will be needed to ensure that the cedar can be mergeable at that next rotation. Now, there are other situations where higher densities of understory fir or cedar are appropriate. And you could put forward other variations too, if supported by literature, modeling, or most importantly, field data. It'd likely be helpful to do a joint tour with district staff to get their support. If you're doing this, you can also reach out to me too.
Okay, next we have to talk about the cedar hemlock stalking standards. For these standards, there are no restrictions on cedar at all. That's because you're likely to harvest these types of sites on a longer rotation anyways. However, there are restrictions on the shade intolerant species, and they're actually more restrictive. That's because shade tolerance varies. Fir is increasingly intolerant on northern and wetter subzones, which is where you typically have cedar hemlock old growth stands. Given that, we decided to just align the understory restrictions with the basal area groupings of the stalking standard table. So fir, white pine, and lodgepole pine are unrestricted in non-stratifiable areas with less than 9 meters squared per hectare total basal area, and then they're considered not suitable in areas with greater than 9 meters squared per hectare total basal area.
Okay, before we dive into the survey process, I need to quickly explain layers because they come up a lot. So first, layer 4 is the regeneration layer. It consists of trees that are less than or equal to 1.3 meters tall. Layer 3 is the sapling layer. It consists of trees that are greater than 1.3 meters, but less than 7.5 centimeters dBH, diameter at breast height. Layer 2 is the pole layer. Layer 2 trees are 7.5 centimeters dBH to 12.49 centimeters dBH. And finally, layer 1 is your mature layer. It consists of trees that are greater than or equal to 12.5 centimeters dBH. Now, for this survey, you really just need to tell apart your layer 1 trees from everything else. You're going to collect and report information on the layer 1 trees. Then you will collect and report information on a combined understory layer, which includes layers 2, 3, and 4. In results, you'll report this combined understory layer into the most abundant understory layer based on total tree density. So if you only need to tell the layer 1 trees apart from everything else, you can speed up your assessment by marking 12.5 centimeters on your field notebook. Then you'll have a quick way to gauge dBH. You will only need to pull out your dBH tape for ones that are close to that line. Now, on the coast, if you leave your free-growing survey until the regenerating trees are 15 to 20 years old, it is feasible that some of them will be greater than 12.5 centimeters dBH. If that's the case, just count them like layer 2 trees. This survey is meant to be separating the overstory from the understory, and we don't want understory regenerating trees getting merged or blended with the residuals in our reporting. Okay, I'll now walk you through the process of the survey, starting off with the office review. Surveying complex vertical stands can be significantly slower than a conventional single-layer survey, but you can speed it up if you do a good office review. So you'll want to start off with a site plan and site plan map. From that, hopefully you'll see how much basal area has been retained, where it's been retained, and why. This is important for stratification and for reporting the reserve objective to results. You'll also want to check if appropriate stalking standards have been applied or if you'll need to do an amendment. You'll also check all the usual things that you look for in a site plan as well. Other helpful resources include the harvest instructions and possibly the CRUs. From these, you can probably determine heights and ages, possible forest health problems, and maybe get a sense of an appropriate prism size. I'd also recommend looking at some imagery, whether that's Google Earth or something better. Also, if you have LiDAR, a crown height model would be really useful for stratification. You can also use it to get heights of your layer 1 trees. It's going to be more accurate than probably what you can do in the field. In your office review, you might find a leaf treat table like this one. If you find it, you can pull some great info from it, especially if you load it into Excel. So for example, for this one, I can quickly see that all the residuals are greater than 12.5 centimeters dBH, so they're all layer 1 trees. I can also tally the number of trees that are present. So in Excel, I could quickly see that there's 142 trees. The NAR of this stand is 4.2. So I go 142 divided by 4.2, and that gives me the density of the layer 1 trees. So it's 34 trees per hectare. I can also use this to calculate the planned post-harvest basal area per hectare using each tree's DBH. So as a reminder, to calculate basal area per tree, you go DBH squared, so DBH times DBH times 0.00007854. When you get your basal area per tree, you then sum it up across all trees and you divide that by the NAR. So for this example, it ends up being 9.8 meters square per hectare of planned post-harvest retention. Next, using this table, I can also see the leading and secondary layer 1 species. So fir is clearly leading and hemlock is secondary. If I don't want to do field heights in the field, I have a full census here, and honestly, that's fine. I can calculate height by species. So for fir, it's 41.6, hemlock is 37.7. That obviously is a little bit different than if you followed the manual, but again, this is a census versus a sample. It's more accurate, and you'd definitely be within 20% of an auditor's estimate. Okay, I'll now walk you through the stratification expectations. All the normal stratification criteria outlined in the FS 660 and the survey manual apply. On top of that, there's some CEDRSS specific criteria, and they differ by stand type. So I'll start off with fir. If you have any areas greater than 1 hectare with less than 5 meters squared per hectare total or crop basal area, you'll want to stratify these areas out and apply even age single layer stocking standards. So your status quo 900, 500. You'll then survey these areas using the normal status quo survey method. So you can see that that applies to this area through here. Next, it's possible that you could have greater than 5 meters squared total basal area, but less than 5 meters squared crop basal area. In that situation, you have a legal obligation to report the stratum as a multi-layer stand, but CEDRSS isn't triggered because it's based on crop basal area. If this situation arises, you're going to need to stratify the area out and apply even age single layer standards. Then you'd survey it more or less per normal, but you would collect inventory information on the layer 1 trees. So you'd end up reporting to results a layer 1 inventory, a layer 4 inventory, and a layer 4 silviculture. So this situation could arise if the fallers left some unhealthy trees standing, for example, some mistletoe trees or some trees with wounds from logging equipment, let's say. Okay, next, if there's any area greater than 1 hectare with greater than 40 meters square crop and some harvesting has been completed, you would also need to stratify out these areas. So let's pretend like that's this area over here. So these areas wouldn't have a regeneration obligation. They'd fall under FPPR 44. So you need to move this area under intermediate cut stocking standards, which are different from CEDRSS, and then you need to survey this area after harvesting, wait 12 months, using the intermediate cut survey method. So last step, if there are any areas greater than 0.1 hectares with no harvesting at all, you would then want to map them out, complete a site plan amendment to remove them from the NAR, and classify them as group reserve. It's definitely to your benefit long term. Okay, next up, these are the stratification criteria for old growth cedar hemlock stands. The criteria follow the same principles as the last slide, but using 9 meters squared of crop trees as the breakpoint rather than 5, because that's where CEDRSS starts for cedar hemlock stands. Okay, and next it's time to head to the field. So the survey manual always recommends starting with a walkthrough or a flyover. You could use a drone for this step, or if the block is heli access, you could do a quick flight of the block before getting dropped off. This step, I'd say, varies in importance depending on the thoroughness of your office review. If you weren't able to track down detailed information on what's been left and where, this step is going to be really important. During your walkthrough, you're going to need to confirm your pre-stratification and make adjustments. And again, this is especially important if you're going to need to do a site plan amendment to move a portion of the block under CEDRSS. During the walkthrough, you're also going to figure out what species you should be collecting heights and ages on. You might already know this for your layer 1 trees if you found a leaf tree table like what I showed a few slides ago. During the walkthrough, you're also going to figure out your prism size, your plot size, your sampling intensity and sampling method, and I'll go into a bit of detail on these. For plot size, you don't want to just default to a 399 meter radius plot cord. Obviously, it's faster than doing a larger plot, but it might not be appropriate if you're going to have a low density of understory crop trees. This is likely to happen at higher crop basal area levels. So for cedar hemlock, above 29 meters square per hectare, and for fir stands, that'd be happening above 24 meters square per hectare. Though of course, you can use a 564 below these thresholds too. You also would want to use a larger plot size if the layer 1 basal area is highly variable. Now, if these aren't the case, then by all means, use a 399. It's way faster, and this already is a slow survey.
Next, you'll need to choose your prism or your angle gauge BAF. The BAF, basal area factor, determines two things: which trees are counted and how much basal area per hectare each counted tree represents. Common BAFs for this type of survey are 3 to 10. You'll need to pick one and use it for the whole stratum, same as picking a plot radius. Typically, if your L1 trees are smaller or they're low density, you'll use a smaller BAF, maybe 3 to 8. If they're big or high density, you'll use a bigger BAF. When you're selecting a BAF, you need to strike the balance between capturing enough in trees per plot, but not picking up so many trees that you have trees away from your plot center that wouldn't actually impact the growth and performance of the understory trees in your plot.
Okay, before I move on, I recognize that you may not already have a prism or angle gauge. If you need to do some shopping, you can buy either type. When ordering, I would buy Canadian to ensure that you're buying a metric tool. If you want a prism, IRL is a BC company, and they have prisms from a BAF of 1 all the way up to 24. And as of 2025, they're $116 each. Now, if you need a few, that could get pricey. And as a warning, they can break. So prisms are way more common in BC, but angle gauges are also an option. They're incredibly common back east. They'd be a perfect tool, in my opinion, for silviculture surveying. It's an easier learning curve, they don't break, and you get multiple BAFs per device, so it's a lot cheaper. You can buy them from BAP Equipment. It's a New Brunswick company, and they're $60 each. You can buy one that has a BAF of 3, 10, and 30, or you can buy an angle gauge with BAFs of 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you bought both of those, it'd end up being the same price as a single prism, and you'd get 6 BAFs, which would cover most silviculture surveying situations on the coast. Okay, next, you need to determine the sampling intensity and method. You should go at 1 plot per hectare. These stands are typically highly variable, and there's no statistical analysis associated with the survey method, so it's required. You also need to use grid or vector sampling. Representative and visual assessments just aren't an option for this survey method.
Okay, it's now time to talk about data collection and how you'll record that data. It's hopefully getting simpler because I've now made an automated spreadsheet. It'll be linked in the implementation guide and posted on the BC Silviculture Survey Reference Documents website. Now, the big warning statement: the government does not assume responsibility for any errors or inaccuracies produced by the spreadsheet. The signing professional has to ensure the work is complete, correct, and clear. And on that note, this is a newly developed spreadsheet, and it pushed my technical abilities, so you could find formula glitches or mistakes. If you do, please just reach out as soon as possible so I can get it fixed and reposted. Now, to limit mistakes, please make sure that you're always downloading a new, clean, blank copy off of the website versus blanking it out and reusing a spreadsheet from a different SU. That definitely can create errors.
Okay, next, the spreadsheet has several tabs. You can see them down here. If you read through the starter procedure instructions, I repeatedly reference field numbers. I say, enter this value in field 5. If you want to see what field I'm referencing, go to this tab right here. I then provide an example of both the 657 and the 658, 659 spreadsheets, so you can see how the data is entered and how the spreadsheet works. I then have completely blank templates of the 657, which works for up to 2 stratum, and then the 658, 659 template for stratum 1 and stratum 2. Okay, once you're done your walkthrough, you're going to want to fill out the FS 657 tab of the Excel workbook for each stratum. I kept the template very simple. It only has a small percent of the fields that you normally find on the paper card, but it's editable. You are welcome to add in other fields. Just make sure that you don't move the locations of any of the yellow or orange fields, or you might break the formulas in the spreadsheet tabs. I have the absolutely critical fields in orange. If you don't enter these, the formulas will not work on the FS 658, 659 card. So at minimum, you have to enter the plot multiplier. It's 200 if you use a 3.99 meter plot, and 100 if you use a 564. You also have to enter the BAF, the basal area factor. And then when you're done the survey, you have to enter the number of completed plots. Lastly, you have to enter the stocking standards. You need to enter the basal area ranges for each of the groupings, and you have to use this format specifically. That's key for getting the formula in this row to work, and this is needed in order to get some of the calculations in the FS 658, 659 sheet to work. Then, for each grouping, you also have to enter the target and minimum stocking standard. If you do that, the TSS and MSS will automatically fill in for each plot based on your plot's crop basal area. All other cells are in yellow, are fillable. They're recommended, but if you don't fill them out, at the very least, they will not cause any formulas to break. Okay, to fully teach you how to do the survey method, we're going to use a fake example. I'm going to pretend like I'm surveying a 5.2 hectare zonal SU in the CWH VM1 that was an old growth cedar hemlock stand pre-harvest. So I enter in my block information, same as normal. For survey parameters, I'm going to go with a 399 meter radius plot. The basal area isn't too high or variable, so that's reasonable and it's faster than a 564. Then for my BAF, I'm going to go with a 5. Based on my walkthrough, I have between 10 and 20 meters square per hectare in most areas of the block. So with a 5, I should be picking 2 to 4 in trees per plot, which is a nice sample. I also won't be skipping any of these basal area groupings. 5 falls in really nicely to all of those ranges. Next, my SU is 5.2 hectares, so I'm going to be doing 5 plots, and this is a key field for the calculations on the next slide. All of these orange ones are again. For free growing damage criteria, I'm going to use the CEDRSS tables and the FS 660. For objectives, I'm going to be doing stocking, free growing, and forest health information. The SU looks borderline free growing, so it makes sense to do both stocking and free growing. I then enter in the stocking standards up here. So there's a lot more to enter than normal, apologies. So you enter in the basal area ranges, then the TSS and MSS for each corresponding range. And it looks like I'm entering it in correctly. This is the basal area range row is the one to pay particular attention to. If you don't enter it correctly, then this row and this row won't calculate. So for the next tab over to work, this row needs to be pulling the first number from each of these ranges. So 23 to 28.99, it pulls 23. Then in this section, I enter in the ecologically suitable species. So this is a VM1 101, so previously 01 site series. And we have hemlock, fir, balsam, and cedar. And fir does have a restriction, so I mark yes right here. And then you enter any of those restrictions under this clause section. So for the understory fir, it's only ecologically suitable in non-stratifiable areas less than 9 meters square per hectare total basal area. Otherwise, it's unsuitable. And then last up, I enter in MITD right here, and I'll explain that on the next slide. Okay, next, this is what was entered into the spreadsheet. I'll just explain what that means. For CEDRSS, there is no MITD for the layer 1 trees. So you can have 2 residuals that are directly adjacent to each other, within 5 centimeters of each other. And as long as they meet the damage criteria and they're ecologically suitable, you can count them both as crop trees. In contrast, for your layer 2, 3, and 4 trees, they need to be 2 meters apart from each other or whatever MITD is specified in your forest stewardship plan. Now, the next one's unique. The MITD between the layer 2, 3, and 4 trees and the overstory layer 1 trees is drip line. So you need to consider the drip line of trees that are inside or outside of the plot. You also have to consider the drip line of both crop and non-crop layer 1 trees. So drip line is defined as the vertical boundary of the outside-most live foliage of the overstory tree. So on this tree, this is the outermost branch, and you basically just draw a straight line down. So any trees within this area are considered to be within the drip line. So none of these trees can actually be taken as well spaced or free growing, unfortunately. And if you did have any trees that are really, really close to this drip line, you measure the understory trees from their main stem pith. After we fill out the FS 657, we need to fill out the header of the FS 658, 659 sheet. We need to enter in the species that are present in the stratum, both ecologically suitable species and ones that aren't. If there's multiple surveyors, make sure to order them in a consistent way. You'll note that we have alder in our stand, but it's not an ecologically suitable species in our stocking standards, so we put a U for unacceptable. Then for fir, it's ecologically suitable, but only at certain basal area levels. So I enter it as RP, and the R just represents restricted. To make the wall space preferred and free growing preferred calculate properly, please make sure to always put the R before the P and separate them with a dash with no spaces. For all other species, if they're listed as ecologically suitable, for the purpose of reporting to results, just label them as P for preferred. Okay, I'll now walk you through how to complete a plot, starting off with your layer 1 trees. So to begin, you're going to do a prism sweep, where you count all in layer 1 trees by species. This is a variable radius plot, so your in trees could be outside of the fixed area plot. Now, if you're using a prism, this is what an in tree would look like. So what you see through the prism clearly overlaps with the actual tree. In contrast, this is an out tree. There is zero overlap. And this is a borderline tree. It's right on the edge. Now, if you have a borderline tree, you can mathematically figure out if it's in or out. However, for this survey, we are okay with you counting every other borderline tree as in to keep things efficient and simple. After you finish your total tree count using your prism, you'll then need to consider which of these trees can be counted as crop. And you'll need to do this crop tree tally by species. Now, to be a crop layer 1 tree, they have to be ecologically suitable, and they have to meet the free growing damage and merchantability requirements. And these criteria are outlined in Table 27 of the FS 660. For these layer 1 crop trees, you do not need to worry about MITD, minimum heights, or competing vegetation criteria. Finally, you have to determine the total density of the layer 1 trees in the fixed area plot. So you're going to use your plot cord. You don't need to do this step by species. For the large majority of CEDRSS stands, you're going to need to do this step. However, if the polygon status of your stratum is matte, you can skip this step. A stratum would be matte if it's stalked, and the layer expected to have the highest volume at the next rotation is currently 120 years old or older. So that is possible if you're surveying a cedar hemlock old growth block with high levels of retained basal area and a low understory density. Now, if that's confusing, if you don't quite understand that, just always complete this step. Do a total tree tally in your fixed area plot. Okay, I'll now show you how to enter that info into the new spreadsheet. For each plot, there's 2 rows for layer 1 information. The T1 row right here is for a layer 1 inventory information. The T represents total trees. The F1 row is for your silviculture information. The F represents free growing. So for this plot, using a BAF of 5, I counted 3 in layer 1 trees in my prism suite. 2 were hemlock and 1 was cedar. This is summed in this column titled Total Capped Prism Count. In the next column over, the prism count is multiplied by the BAF to give you total basal area. So 3 times 5 equals 15. This happens automatically if you've entered the BAF in the FS 657. Then, as your next step, you have to figure out if your 3 in trees are all free growing, aka crop trees. Again, you don't have to worry about spacing. You just have to consider species and the damage criteria. So we have hemlock and cedar. They're both ecologically suitable in the stocking standards, so that's a check. And they look healthy and mergeable. None of the damage criteria are surpassed. So we entered 2 and 1 in the F1 row, and that gets automatically summed up over here. And then once again, multiplied by the BAF to give you the crop basal area of 15. Now, if the crop basal area was higher than 40, then it would actually get capped at 40. So I put another example here to show that. In this example, there's 11 in layer 1 crop trees, which would translate to 55 meters squared per hectare crop basal area. But you'll see that that gets automatically capped at 40 meters squared per hectare in this column. So the final thing I want to show you is this field here. And if you're collecting data for layer 1 density, you enter the number of trees tallied within your fixed area plot using your plot cord in this cell. So it doesn't need to be by species. And you'll notice that this value will often be different from the total picked up in your prism count. And that's totally normal. Your prism sweep is based on a variable radius plot, so you'll often be picking up trees outside of the fixed area plot. So don't expect these to be the same. It's completely fine if they're different. Before we move on to the combined understory data collection, I want to quickly cover the merchantability requirements. These criteria only apply to cedar. For any layer 1 cedar to be crop, it has to meet these. However, there isn't anything necessarily to report under the forest health damage section if these aren't met. So, what's the criteria? For cedar to be crop, they must be able to produce more than 50% mergeable volume in the first 10-meter log length. That could be utility grade, which would mean a solid 8-inch shell, or a higher grade product like sawlogs if it's complete solid wood. Now, this can be hard to tell if you've never cruised or worked in quality control before, so we do have a list of defects to help you gauge this. So I'd recommend pausing here, reading through the list, and then I'll show you some photo examples. Okay, here are some examples of trees that are good. They would meet the crop definition. So on the left, we clearly have some rot in the center, but at least 50% of the stem is mergeable within this first 10-meter log length. For the second picture, we do have butt rot, but it doesn't extend through the tree, so it's still possible to achieve 50% mergeable wood. And then in this third picture, we definitely have forking. This tree has poor form overall, but this first 10-meter log length, it is clear. It's solid wood, and this tree would meet the crop definition. In contrast, these trees would not meet the merchantability criteria. So this cedar has forking here and up here. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a cat face in this area, so a scar which shows as grayed or weathered wood. And then for this cedar, there's significant twist going to the left for the first and second log length, and twist to the left can extend into the heartwood, which then can significantly degrade the log quality and value. Okay, with that background info out of the way, we're going to move on to our next step, where we're going to collect information on our understory trees, our layers 2, 3, and 4. So to do that, we're going to switch back to our fixed area plot again. So the data collection will be based on the plot cord swing. We'll start by tallying all living trees by species as per normal. So we're only counting trees that are listed in the FS 660 species table, and we're excluding germinates using the normal germinates definition. After we complete that tally, we're then going to start counting our well-spaced trees by species, including those in excess of the plot's M value. A well-spaced tree is ecologically suitable according to the stocking standards and meets the minimum intertree distance. Finally, we're going to tally the free-growing trees by species. A free-growing tree is well-spaced. It meets the minimum free-growing heights, the crop-to-brush ratio, and the free-growing forest health damage criteria. Okay, here's the spreadsheet showing a few more rows now for the combined understory layer, which again consists of layers 2, 3, and 4. So for each plot, you're going to have a total tree row for this combined understory layer. You're going to have a well-spaced row and a free-growing row. So in our plot 1, I'm going to count 5 hemlock in this understory layer and 1 cedar. That gets automatically summed over in this column, and this value is going to be used in the density calculations for the inventory layer of this combined understory layer. I then need to figure out which of these trees are well spaced. And again, to be well spaced, they need to be ecologically suitable, and they need to be at least 2 meters apart from other understory well spaced trees and outside the drip line of any layer 1 tree. So because of that, for this example, we're going to pretend like we can only take 1 hemlock, imagining that all other hemlock are within the drip lines of these overstory trees. And then we can take 1 cedar as well spaced. So 1 plus 1, that's 2, and that gets summed up right here. This column tallies your well-spaced free-growing trees with no M value being applied. In contrast, this column for your well-spaced free-growing layers, it tallies your well-spaced free-growing trees, but it applies the M value. So I'll show you another example. Okay, so for this next plot, we have 2 crop layer 1 trees. And because of that, our target and minimum stocking standard is 800, 400. And these columns are going to automatically populate if you've entered in the stocking standards correctly into the FS 657. So given that, we can only have in this column a max of 4 trees. And so we have in our understory 4 plus 1, 5 well-spaced trees, and that gets tallied here. Here, it automatically gets reduced down to the M value. And as a reminder, the M value can change plot to plot if your TSS changes, which can happen since it's linked to your plot's crop basal area. So these 2 plots happen to have the same TSS, MSS, but that can change. Our next plot might have a higher crop basal area, which then would lead to a lower TSS. So in this one, we have 4 in trees. 4 times 5 is 20, 20 meters squared. So our TSS is 700. So now our M value is 3.5. And in this plot, we have 6 understory well-spaced trees. It's tallied here. And it gets automatically reduced down to the M value right here, so 3.5. So as long as you've entered things into the 657, it does make this process a lot easier. I recognize it is kind of complicated having your stocking standards change plot to plot. You still need to be aware of this though, in terms of the MSS, because you do need to stratify if you have any areas that aren't meeting the plot stocking standard. I'll get into that a little bit later.
On the last slide, I explained where to record information and emphasized how the TSS and MSS can change per plot. On this slide, I want to show you how the TSS, MSS can stay the same, but the species suitability can change. So to do that, I created 4 plots, all with the TSS, MSS of 800, 400. Now in plot 1, we have 20 meters squared total basal area and 10 meters squared crop basal area. Not all of the layer 1 hemlock could be taken as crop trees due to forest health damage. One hemlock has mechanical wound from harvesting, the other has mistletoe. Nevertheless, these 2 trees are using site resources and creating shade that will impact the growth, health, and potentially survival of any understory Douglas fir, which are shade intolerant. Given this, there are a number of restrictions on fir's ecological suitability in the stocking standard based on total basal area and aspect. For the cedar hemlock CEDRSS, at or above 16 meters squared total basal area, fir cannot be taken as well-spaced or free-growing. So for this plot, 3 Douglas fir trees were planted, but none of them can be taken. As a result, we only have 1 well-spaced and only 1 free-growing tree. So this plot is NSR and NFG. In our second plot, we
have 15 meters square total basal area, 15 meters square crop basal area, leading again to an 800-400 stocking standard. At 15 meters square per hectare total basal area, only 200 stems per hectare of fir can be taken as well-spaced or free-growing. So we did that. This plot is SR and free-growing, just meeting the MSS. In our plot 3, we have 10 meters square total basal area, 10 meters square crop. At this basal area level, given our aspect is southwest, fir is unrestricted. We can take all fir as well-spaced and free-growing, assuming all other conditions are met. So we take 3 as well-spaced, 3 as free-growing, and we now meet the understory M value. In our 4th plot, we have 10 meters squared total basal area, 10 meters square crop, same as the last plot. However, this time we can't take any fir as well-spaced or free-growing because this plot is on a north aspect and we're within 1 tree length of a layer 1 tree. So fir is not ecologically suitable. Given these examples, I hope you can see the importance of working with your falling crew to ensure they're leaving healthy trees standing and that they're avoiding damage to the residuals. I hope you also can see the need to work with your tree planters to give them guidance on microsite planting, giving them instructions on what species to plant in different areas and the need to avoid dripline. Okay, as the next step, we're going to collect and record forest health information. You've likely partially done this already since it would have influenced your choice of free-growing trees. To be most efficient, I normally would do a prism sweep of my layer 1 trees and then I do a plot spraying of all my understory trees. Then I'd record forest health information, and then after that I'd move on to my crop layer 1 trees and my well-spaced free-growing layer 2, 3, 4 trees. But if you haven't fully done it, now is the time. You need to record all forest health damage that exceeds the FS660 damage criteria on all trees. You have to do it by layer and by species and have 2 examples to show you that. So in the first example, we have an overstory tree with hemlock dwarf mistletoe. We also have an understory tree with mistletoe. They're both entered just under 2 rows, 1 for O, 1 for U. So the O represents your layer 1 trees, the U is for your combined layer 2, 3, 4 trees. Similarly, if you have a damage agent that has affected multiple species in your plot, you will record the damage by species, so it'll take multiple rows. So we have that here. We have deer damage, 1 row for cedar, 1 row for cypress. Okay, before we move on, I want to quickly cover mistletoe since it can be very problematic if it's not identified at the pre-harvest stage and then addressed during harvesting. It's also a good example for demonstrating how the damage criteria can differ between the understory layers and the overstory layer 1. Okay, so right here we have the damage criteria for layer 1 trees, and this is from table 27 of the FS660. It says that a tree is unacceptable if it has a Hawksworth rating greater than 3 or a severe stem infection. And if you look into the old FPC mistletoe guidebook, a severe stem infection means major swelling. Major swelling is defined as having swelling on greater than 25% of the stem circumference. So this would be more than 25%. Now, in contrast, here we have the criteria for your layers 2, 3, 4 from table 28 of FS660. In a layer 2, 3, 4 tree is unacceptable if there is any mistletoe infection on the stem or a living branch. The severity does not matter. Now, to confirm the infection, you do need to observe basal cups like this, or aerial shoots on the region like this, or you need to have found a live or dead fallen brim. Now, this last bullet right here is unique, where it influences your choice of free-growing trees, but it doesn't lead to any forest health reporting. It states that any susceptible trees within 10 meters of a higher layer infected tree cannot be taken as free-growing. So, if you have a mature hemlock with mistletoe, whether it's inside or outside of your plot or even the block, you then cannot take any understory hemlock as free growing within 10 meters of it. Before I move on, I quickly want to cover the Hawksworth rating system because you need to use it to assess the layer 1 trees. So you can find these instructions and this graphic in the FS 660. Basically, you divide the live crown of an infected tree into thirds. For each third, you give it a point value based on the abundance of infections from 0 to 2. So if there's 0, no visible infections, the section receives 0 points. If there's a light infection, which is half or less of the total number of branches are infected, you get 1 point. And that's for that specific third. If more than 50% of the branches are infected, the section earns 2 points. If a tree earns 4 or more points across the three portions, then it can't be taken as free growing. All right, after you wrap up forest health, you're going to move on to crown closure. For crown closure, you're going to do an estimate for the layer 1 overstory, and then you're going to do a second estimate for the combined layer 2, 3, 4. Now, for your layer 1 in particular, it can be really helpful to use imagery if available, and to do the estimate looking down. If that's not available, you'll just have to do it looking up, and I'd recommend using this graphic, same as what you normally do for the understory, and this is in the FS 660. After that, you're going to do plantable spots, preparable spots, germinants, and ground vegetation. And you're basically just following regular procedures. You only need to collect this if it's relevant. So if your block is fully stocked, there's 0 chance of a fill plant or a replant. You don't need to collect plantable or preparable spots. It's not relevant. Don't waste your time. Okay, moving on, heights and ages. You need to do silviculture and inventory heights and ages for layer 1 and the combined understory layers 2, 3, 4. So it could be a lot of work. As a warning, your leading or secondary species can change between layers or between data types too. So the data entry can get quite confusing if you're not careful. As of 2022, you're meant to pick a representative free-growing tree of the leading silviculture species and measure its height and age. For your combined layer 2, 3, 4, you should pick a free-growing tree from within your fixed area plot. For your layer 1, you should pick a representative tree from among your crop trees, and these could be outside of your fixed area plot, given you're using a prism or angle gauge. For inventory heights and ages, you should be picking the tallest tree from within your plot for the leading and secondary species. For the understory, that's from your fixed area plot. For the overstory, that's from your variable radius plot. Now, like I already mentioned, if you have lots of height measurements already from the layout crew or site plan forester of your dispersed residuals, you can use those for regen delay. For free growing though, you'll probably need to update the heights if it's been 10, 15, 18 years. You'll need a clino or a laser, so make sure that you're ready with the necessary equipment. For ages, you can core some trees with an increment borer, or look at the stumps or the crews. Now, if you're looking at the crews or stumps, make sure that you're adjusting the age as the remaining living trees grow older. Okay, before I fully wrap up, I need to plug these fields right here. These are all mandatory reporting fields to results, and tree cover pattern, reserve type, and reserve objective in particular get missed. It's one of the highest areas of noncompliance, and we are really going to try to clean that up. So what are they? We'll start off with reserve type and reserve objective. So if you're doing a CEDRSS survey, it means that your residual mature trees are associated with the NAR. They aren't mapped. They are part of the net area to be reforested. If that's the case, the reserve type is always dispersed, which keeps it easy. Then for reserve objective, it's going to be more variable. It's going to be the reason for which the residual trees were retained. And this should be clearly specified within the site plan, and it's likely linked to some FERPA value or an objective under an order. It is feasible that the residuals were left for multiple values. If that's the case, you're just going to have to pick the one that seems highest importance. All right, next we have tree cover pattern. For the stratum, you need to estimate the tree cover pattern number. It gets submitted as part of the polygon to results. It is meant to represent the horizontal spatial arrangement of residual patches of overstory layer 1 trees. And so for these graphics, the gray area represents the layer 1 trees and the white represents areas without layer 1 trees. And you can find these images in Appendix A of the document entitled Submitting Forest Cover to Results for Openings with Tree Retention. It's linked in the CEDRSS implementation guide and the surveys manual, and is also found on the results website. Lastly, you need to determine the site index. This gets reported for the polygon component, not by layer, to results. It should be reported for the leading inventory species of the next layer to be harvested, or the layer with the highest expected volume at the next rotation. So if you're doing a free growing survey and have 7 meters square per hectare of layer 1 trees and 900 stems per hectare of layer 3 trees, obviously you have more volume in layer 1 right now. However, in 8 years' time, you'll have way more volume from the regenerating trees versus the residuals. Given that, you'd report the site index of the leading inventory species of the combined understory layer. In contrast, if you currently have 33 meters square per hectare and only 100 stems per hectare of understory trees, you're going to have way more volume on the residuals at the next harvest than on the planted trees. If that was the case, you'd report the site index of the leading inventory species for the layer 1. Now, either way, you're going to use CIBEC to look up site index. Growth intercept isn't suitable for mature trees or for regenerating trees when their growth may have been influenced by overstory trees. Actually, I have one more field to cover. Stocking status is just a little bit more complicated than normal because it's a multi-layer stand. So when your stratum is SR or free growing, you have to choose between IMM and MAT, immature, immature. And it's pretty similar to site index. You have to determine what layer will have the most volume at the next rotation. And that could be in 80 years, 100 years, 120 years time. So if your understory layer will be contributing the most volume in 80 years time, then your status will be IMM. If your overstory layer will be contributing more volume in 80 years time and is currently greater than 120 years old, then your status should be reported as MAT. Now, as a reminder, you can only skip reporting layer 1 inventory density if your status is MAT. So this is most likely to occur if you're surveying in an old growth cedar hemlock stand and they left a high amount of layer 1 residuals. Otherwise, you'll probably have more volume from the understory, or your residuals, if it's a second growth Douglas fir stand, your residuals probably are less than 120 years old.
All right, to tie all that together, I'm going to walk through a visual example. We're going to pretend like it's plot 1, so it's a full measure plot. And we're using a BAF of 5, and these are our stocking standards. So I start off by doing my prism sweep, and I count all my layer 1 trees. So I have 1 hemlock, 2 hemlock, 3 hemlock, cedar. So in total, I have 20 meters square basal area. So you can see this all entered here. So I have 3 hemlock, 1 cedar, that adds up to 4. That gets multiplied by the BAF of 5 to give us 20. I then examine my layer 1 trees to determine which of them can be crop. So to be crop, they need to be preferred, aka ecologically suitable, and hemlock and cedar are. They also need to meet the free growing forest health damage criteria and the merchantability requirements. So the cedar does meet the merchantability requirements, and the cedar and these 2 hemlock meet the damage criteria. This hemlock, unfortunately, does not. It has mistletoe, and when we use the Hawksworth method, we ended up at 4 points, and that means that it is not a suitable tree. So we can tally in total 2 hemlock and 1 cedar as crop. So that's 3 trees. 3 times 5, 15. Our crop basal area is 15. 15 puts us in this basal area grouping, 9 to 15.99. That then sets our plots TSS and MSS to 800 and 400, and that will auto-populate right here. We then do our swing of our understory layers. So we start off by just doing a total tree count using a 3.99 meter plot cord. And we find hemlock, 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 balsam, fir, balsam, cedar.
So in total, that is 5 hemlocks, 1 cedar, and 2 balsam trees. So we enter that in here. That adds up to 9 trees total, which sums right here. Then we need to determine which of these trees are well spaced. So all these species are ecologically suitable, though fir has some restrictions. So for fir, we need to examine the the total basal area level. So it is 20 meters squared. Unfortunately, that means at that level, fir is not a suitable species. It cannot be taken as well spaced or free growing. So we put an X on this tree. Well spaced trees also need to be spaced appropriately. So any trees that are under the drip line of a layer 1 tree, whether they're inside or outside, whether they're crop or not, cannot be taken. So these 2 hemlock, they're very clearly within the drip line of this larger hemlock. This balsam is in the drip line of this hemlock. These trees cannot be taken as well spaced. And again, to measure this is from the outermost foliage of a living branch, and you're measuring to the center pith of the understory tree. So this one's only just inside, and these 2 are more clearly inside the drip line. Then we also have to consider the rules around mistletoe. So this tree is a hemlock, and it is less than 10 meters from an overstory infected mistletoe hemlock. So this tree also can't be taken as free growing. As a result, we don't want to overly inflate our well space numbers, so I'm also not going to take it as a well spaced tree. So that one I also put an X on. So what are we left with? This tree is well spaced from all other layer 2, 3, 4 well spaced trees. And it's not in the drip line of anything. It's a hemlock, it's ecologically suitable. So this is well spaced, this is well spaced, and one of these 2 trees can be well spaced, but they're less than 2 meters apart, so they can't both be taken. So I'm going to take the cedar over the balsam. And so this one's also well spaced. So in total, I have 2 well spaced hemlock, 1 well spaced cedar, as that totals up to 3. I then have to examine whether these trees are free growing. So on top of being well spaced, a free growing tree has to be meeting the minimum free growing height, the crop to brush ratio, and the damage criteria. So these 3 trees do meet those conditions. So I am now marking them with an F. So I have 2 hemlock, 1 cedar. Okay, after we finish our tree tallies, we move on to forest health. And we already were paying attention to forest health as we made our free growing calls. So at this point, we know that all trees are good except for this layer 1 hemlock, which has mistletoe. So we record DMH, disease mistletoe hemlock. Our layer is O, overstory, layer 1, and our species is hemlock, and this tree is living. So again, these hemlock, they are less than 10 meters, so they cannot be taken as free growing, given they're in a lower layer than the infected tree. However, you don't actually report any damage unless they too are infected. After that, we do crown closure, and we'll start off with our layer 1 crown closure. We're looking at all trees, conifer, deciduous, crop, non-crop, and we come up with 30% crown closure, and we enter that there. We then do crown closure on our understory trees, and this is all combined understory layers, layers 2, 3, 4, and we say it's 15%. We're doing a free growing survey. The block is clearly stocked, so we did not bother doing plantable, preparable, or germinants. It was not relevant given the stage of the block and the status of the block. So the last thing we did for this section is ground veg. So it's mostly salal, and so we enter in the code. We do our percent cover, 50%, and height, so it's 70 centimeters. So the last thing that we do in the plot is heights and ages. So this is again a full measure plot. So we got to do inventory heights, silviculture heights and ages on both our layer 1 and our combined understory layer. So for the stratum, hemlock is our leading inventory species for both our layer 1 and our understory layer. So for both, we need to figure out heights and ages. So hemlock, our tallest hemlock of our layer 1 is 42 meters, and we cored it and we got 160. We then determined cedar to be our secondary species at the stratum level. It's not, oh sorry, it is for this plot as well, but it doesn't matter about the plots leading in secondary, it's all about the stratum. So cedar, we measure the tallest cedar. We only have one cedar within our variable radius plot, and it's 30 meters and 150 years old. We then do the same for our understory layer. So we find the tallest hemlock within our fixed radius plot. We measure it, 4.2, 13 years old. And then cedar is our secondary stratum species. For this plot, balsam would be the secondary species. That doesn't matter. We're only ever doing stratum leading and secondary. So for cedar, it's 2.7 meters tall, 13 years old. And then we repeat for our crop trees. So for our crop hemlock, we just pick a representative one. Let's say this one's representative, and we do height and age, so 42 and 160, so same as our inventory. And then for understory, we do it for our leading species. And again, this is for the stratum. And cedar overall at the stratum level is our leading understory free growing species. And so we determine its age, 13, and height, 2.7. Okay, that wraps up the field portion of your CEDRSS training. I've made a second video covering data compilation, how to make a stocking size decision, and results reporting, and I'll link it here.
If you have any questions or feedback on the survey procedure or the spreadsheet, please reach out. My email is on the slide. Also, if you have CEDRSS blocks and could benefit from in-person field training, let me know where you work and how many people from your company would attend.